Several guards Nadja had encountered on her way in, now decorated with sizable dents in their armor prior to her outburst. Understandably, they fled for their lives. Nadja reached the main gate to the fortress. She glared up at the defense tower that operated the gate. After a brief moment, the impatient lioness roared at the top of her lungs, "Open." The men in the tower jolted in fear before operating the gate wheel. The massive iron gate rocked open, greeting Nadja to a settling red sun and the familiar faces of her clan parked outside. A large gathering of barbaric animals, tigers, gorillas, vipers, vultures, etc., greeted Nadja with eyes eager for their next order. Zutta, a battle-worn elderly wolf, stood next to Nadja's primitive horse. He looked to her with great concern, as did everyone else, though he alone saw a distressing look on Nadja's face, the look of defeat. "Nadja, how'd it go up there? Should I prep our men for—" Nadja leapt up on her horse saddle, with ease, roaring to her clansmen. "We're heading out now." No one questioned Nadja's order, swiftly trailing behind as her horse galloped ahead. Nadja and her tribe ventured out towards the wasteland, rushing away from the fortress. Nadja rode her warband aimlessly out into the decrepit wastelands. She and most of her clan were expecting a bloodbath. All things considered, the evening called forth for her full fury. But Nadja couldn't think, let alone act, with the brewing storm clouding her thoughts. She didn't know what to expect that morning after hearing about her son's death. She could only remember the grotesque anger that fueled her march into the fortress. It left no time to mourn, no room to grieve for the fallen. All that they've won from the day was a bleeding sun settling into a lifeless land of canyons and rubble. The rubble. The lioness' eyes flared with renewed savagery. She leaps off her horse mid-gallop and pounces forth to the landfall. Her clan looked on with expressed confusion, witless, primal fear guided her way. The sudden composition to run felt right for her. It was the only feeling worth being compelled by as more continued to flood in. Her heart was sinking to a new plane of anguish. Fear, heartache, loathing, these were all gifted to her by those she called her allies. All of these base emotions gushed violently out at the mere glance of the canyon rubble. Her mind was like that of a boiling pot, overflowing with heated thoughts and thirsting remorse. Her people mindlessly slaughtered, their hunting cries lost in the wind, the fleeting thoughts of her baby boy, every gruesome thought of the event swirled through her mind. All she could do was scream, "Rawr." I can't. Whenever it does the scream once, it's like 2 in the morning. I can't do that. Attack a tree, attack a boulder. I'm assuming if I attack the boulder, something bad will happen. So what we're gonna do? We're gonna do the tree. Her body began to tremble anxiously. There was no room for fear, though, only action. She knew better than to let her aggression consume her, but merely channel it. Right now, more than ever, she needed it all out right away. A withered tree stood idly out in the wasteland. Signs of heavy rot shone within the dried hollow bark of the wood. She stormed over to the dried up husk. It towered ominously overhead, nearly twice her height. Fist-balled, Nadja plunges her deadly talons into the tree, bursting her arm straight through. Gripping her claws into the bark, she lifted the tree out of the ground with ease, roots and all. Slamming it to the ground, she freed her arm and tore the tree in half, tossing it to the sands. She frantically tears into the bark, ripping it to bits. She becomes lost in her savagery to pay her approaching clan any mind. Nadja let out a primal roar full of pure anguish and despair, leaving the very air itself trembling. She began to pace in circles, as though trapped in her own mind, like a caged beast, her attention snapping aimlessly about, as if actively seeking an enemy to war. Her deranged eyes darted from the desert to the canyons to the sky and even to her own clan. She snapped back towards her horse and unlatched her spear. Concern hung on the brow of each member of the tribe as they watched their chieftain lose herself to madness. However, concern was evaluated into panic as Naja aimed the spear directly at her own people. Without warning, she hurled the spear. Everyone in front ducked for cover. The spear passed harmlessly over them. Every spectating eye was glued to the spear now, seeing where it was heading. A moment passed where the spear fell back into the ground, bringing a body-shaped mass with it. Somebody had been spying on them. Naja cared not what colors it wore. She cared not for the prying eyes above her warband. Zutta? Take your men and handle that damn spy. Do whatever you'd like with it. Pluck its feathers, gut it, stick its head on a spike. I want it to be a message to whoever thought it was wise to have eyes on us. Zutta nodded and waved his men down to hand out their orders. Naja's fists began to tremble. The rage within began to engulf her body and soul. Her outlandish attack may have proved therapeutic for that instance, but a swell of the issue came ready to burst forth out of her. Okay, you know what? From now on, if we get something like this, I'm just gonna go. That's what we're gonna do. So here we go. They call us savages. They call us primitives. Fodder to feed the flames of their petty war. Naja fed into her anger, peering down at the faces those who followed her. She lashed out into the air, working herself into a guttural tirade. What are we even worth to these highborns? We risk our life and limb fighting on their behalf, and yet they treat us like fools? The sheer power from her roar spooks her horse away, even frightening a few other horses within the front line. She anxiously begins pacing around in circles. The vile toxicity of her fury bled into the words. We're worse than fools to them. We're nothing. Nothing. For every hardship we endured in life, we are still seen as nothing to them. Yet they still take everything we've earned, yet give no empathy for their soldiers, for us? Naja halts in her stead and breathes heavily. Her head began to spin as her unchecked emotions swept through her mind. They took my son. It finally dawned onto her the emotional severity of her people's losses. The temptation to break down and cry right there and then was all too inviting. The feeling was fleeting through, with her volcanic rage dominating her resolve. She prowled through her group, pointing at each member in turn. Anger and remorse burned in her eyes. They took your Maska. They snuffed out the joyous laughter of Rai Rai from us. Lear can never dream of home again. They used our children, our tribe's very future, as a stepping stone for their own meager life. They laughed. Never have I been insulted in my life for the service I provide as a warrior. We Sharkins are known far more than mere faceless grunts until today. The group started out in shocked silence, feeling the weight of the words sink into their pelts. Naja choked up, tears bleeding down her muzzle and falling onto the dirt beneath her feet. Her face was set ablaze with fury and despair. 5 years. For 5 years we fought for their campaign, bloodied our blades, our claws, our fur, but still we were seen as dogs of war to those highborn. Naja glared through glassy, rendered eyes to the direction of the fortress, lost over the hills now, but burned in her memory. They sit on precious ivory, claiming glory, and build their own foundations from fallen, just so they can preserve their meaningless titles, doing all they can to ensure their bastard legacies. Naja turned to her tribe, snarling and spitting at the thought of the highborn. They wish to craft the world in their image, build halls of false heroes, and march in parades to show off their glorious military might. I don't want a world built in their image. It's plenty ugly enough already, if you asked me. I'd soon desecrate every gold statue they erect before acknowledging their deeds. Everyone scoffed in disgust at the notion. And we are supposed to accept this, crawl on our hands and knees at the sight of their fancy clothes and titles because they're special blood? Naja took a stone from the ground and tossed it the fortress's direction, watching it disappear into the night sky. I'll be damned if history gives them the pleasure. If anyone's going to be remembered from this war, it'll be the men and women and children that trudged through the sea of corpses that reached for a better tomorrow. Those lords of court, those pieces of shit deserve to sink into oblivion, not us. The warriors who stood with her roared up a storm with their infection monologue. This war, it's nearly at its end. I can taste it in the air like a wounded beast. It is up to us to bag this prize. No kings, queens, or barons will claim it. In this everlasting warring nightmare, we'll spear through the fog of war and have the sun finally shine upon the glory of our clan's barbarous might. Their collective roars threaten to bring down the sky. Nadja perched herself on a rocky hillside. I'll hang by my neck before I allow us to be forgotten by the end of this war. We are Sharkins. For every babe birthed, a legend is created. For that is our right in life to claim. The hardship we've faced, the battles we won, don't define us today. But this future of our kin, our tribe, our legacy. A grotesque snarl curls in the maw before she spits in the direction of the fortress. For years they sat idly by behind their walls, bleeding away the hours of the day, with little regard to how precious every second is. We're not guardians, not sellswords, we're hunters, the apex predators of these very lands. We will not sit and wait while our prey tride upon our hunting grounds. These highborns lack the resolve to face their biggest quarry, but I do. The Emperor himself, Sulliver Villar. The warband began to chant and bash their weapons in uproar. They marveled at her as she pointed to the setting sun, eaten away by the night. The fool thinks he can sneak within our lands undetected. They clearly never been hunted by the Shirkurin before. We'll be the first to meet his finely groomed ass before anyone else does. I'd personally take his head myself to show the squabbling kingdoms just who we are. The ones who truly ran this war, who truly fueled their victories. We'll make history remember who were the true victors, for it was the Sharkurins through and through. The group cheered in massive roar for the chieftain eagerly chanting her name. Who are we to this world? Are we pawns? The roaring troop yelled no. We are warriors. We do not breed whelps, and we do not suffer fools. We are the Sharkurins. The world will remember our names, that it was the grand tribe of the Sharkurins that conquered the empire. The fangs of war will snap shut, and it will be us who hold the crimson trophy. The militia of animal warriors burst out in savage roars to the heat of their leader's words, only to be snuffed out as Nadja shouted to them again. It will be a long march, and we'll leave at first light. Take your rest now, tomorrow we strive for our birthright. Nadja watched as her tribe dismounted their horses and set to the readying the camp. She spotted a vulture scout approaching her. The two intercepts one another, pressing close enough to conspire their thoughts. Shall I go and intercept our flyboys? Shouldn't take me long to reach the crash site. No, I have Zutta taking care of that. I need you elsewhere, Sendra. The mighty lioness cast her massive paw around the vulture's shoulder, pulling her in closer. Sindra could feel Nadja's sizzling fury still radiating off her. How far have your scouts tracked him? They've been slowly building up their focus through the canal every night since we spotted them. It's only a matter of time till they're on the move. Where they're at now, it'll roughly be a 3-week march out to them, Nadja. Maybe 2 if the horses kept their pace. Good. Nadja made a move to leave before the vulture spread her wings to block her path. My scouts tell me that his regime is growing more terrifying by the day. They smuggled in siege weapons. That reason alone is probably why they've been advancing so slowly. You sure it's wise to leave the rest of the alliance in the dark on this? And give them the satisfaction of saying they've won the war? Bah! Nadja gave Sindra a long, thoughtful look. Besides, it doesn't matter. One way or another, from what I've planned, we'll be at the Emperor's throat before his army knows what hit him. And if they catch wind of us, what then? Word on the winds has it that you're high on their hit list ever since you crashed one of their imperial banquets. For all we know, All of that fancy gear they're porting over could be trained on Shurkerans. We're the only true threat to the Empire. If something happened to us, they might. Sindra choked on her words as Nadja draped a comforting paw on her shoulder. The reassuring gaze she saw in the chieftain's eyes calmed the worry within. Nothing's going to happen to our people. We've endured far worse than some Imperial marching band. What are we? A tense sigh vents out of the vulture's nostrils, followed by a light chuckle. She creaked out a beaky smile and nodded in acknowledgement. Nadja smiles along, patting her shoulder. She slowly looms down and leers down firmly into the bird's eyes, pressing a clawed index finger to her chest lightly. Just be sure it's us and only us who know the Emperor's whereabouts. The vulture nodded and flew off to meet the other scouts, leaving Nadja alone to oversee the encampment. Within the bustling motions of his tribe setting up camp, Zutta rendezvous with a miscreant trio of feline scouters, a lion, a tiger, and a cougar. The cougar eagerly addresses Zutta with a piqued interest. Orders, boss? Take Erdogan and Severix and go check on our little avian speck. Not joining us, Zuts? I'll catch up in a bit. I need to check on a thing or two here. Don't carve too much into the bird. I want to identify them first. No promises, boss. The wolf rolled his eyes at the cheekiness from the cougar. A tired sigh whisked before placing a paw on Fikri's face and pushing him towards the horse. The trio snickers to one another before they mount their steeds and gallop away towards the crash. Zutta returns his attention back to the encampment. Everyone settles down once they started to feast on their replenished rations. He sniffs around and tries to scout out Nadja from the crowd. She wasn't in the camp, he realized. He scans the area and spots the massive lioness lounging off on a far, decrepit tree branch, her attention solely anchored to the wasteland. An odd scraping noise crept to his ears as he trots up to the tree. He glanced up and reeled at the sight of the scratch marks littering the tree bark. He hollers up to Nadja. Not joining us for dinner? Nadja shakes her head dismally. Not hungry. The scratching noises resumed once more. Nadja scraped her claws mindlessly into the bark, sprinkling the ground with wood shavings. I'm going to stand guard for the night anyways. The wolf furrows his brow from hearing this. You haven't slept since the ride down here, though. Sure that's a good idea? Sure, I'm sure. Spite oozes out of her as she snaps her attention fully on Zutta. Her claws sunk deep into the wood now. Zutta held a steely gaze back up at her, only flickering with concern for his chieftain. Nadja pauses briefly. Her eyes twitch with unkept irritation as she tries to rein in her emotions. A shallow sigh paused her lips as she slumped back against the tree and started to gaze back into the wasteland. I can't sleep worth a damn anyways. She massages her eyes meagerly with the tip of her digits, but holds them in place as she starts to growl. Every time I close them, Zutta, I see him. I see my boy. I see him and everyone else, frightened out of their minds all because of that landslide. Her eyes erupt open, bloodshot and red. Her sorrows were swiftly dashed away with her determined anger. It makes you think, doesn't it? Just how long do you think that trap was set, huh? Only thing missing was the bait. The anxiety she harbored in herself reached its brink. In a fidget of rage, her leg stomps onto the tree limb she was perched on. The wild force behind it causes the branch to snap beneath her. Nadja hits the ground on all four, her face ablaze with blistering fury. She grabs a hold of the lengthy branch and chucks it far into the desert. Her body shook with an unyielding growl spewing from her maw. She was shaking all over, Zutta realized. Ever since she was a youngling, Zutta helped her to kindle her rage and fear within her, to never let it fully consume her. It was a rare occasion to see her shaken up like this. With the loss of her own kin, she had the right to be. He'd wisp out a heavy sigh and ventures close to the fuming lioness, his steely gaze held contently on her storming gaze. Nadja, you sure you want to go through with this? Nadja scoffs at the question. She shakes her head dismissively. What other choice is there, Zutta? Join the Empire, perhaps? Place our faith onto highborns who'll never know us but hate us all the same? There is no rhyme or reason to trust anyone outside our own now. The sooner this is done, the better. Zutta nods eagerly to her viewpoint, but wouldn't wave off the concern altogether. He'd often fancied the thought on numerous occasions, in fact. The seasoned hunter recalled vivid points in his life where he worked hand in hand with the Imperials on contract hunts. If they were tolerable to work with back then, perhaps the same could be said today. Naja, however, hisses at the very notion. We can't rely on our allies to do shit, but even a group of idiots can pose a threat, especially if they came at us at every side. We're stretched out bad enough as it is. We can't just... A winded sigh anchors forth from her maw. Her mind was clouded in thoughts alone, none of which provided a clear answer for her. A defeated growl anchors out of Naja, shaking her head. She runs her claws through her hair. No, this is the only option we have, Zutta. We have to strike while we still can. And what if that plan doesn't work? What if the Emperor isn't there? Then we'll slaughter every Imperial we find along the way. Rigord may have stretched our clans thin, but from our homeland, we'll make sure to demonstrate how futile it is going to be against the Shurkaran Legion. Her attention was dead set on the vast empty wastelands, dead set on not meeting Zutta's eyes once more. She did not need to look him in the eyes, however, to feel his chilling gaze on her back. Taking a deep breath, in a moment to collect herself, she cages the corrosive thoughts that drove her to the brink. She closes her eyes and tilts her head skyward. But I'm all ears to hear more options, Zutta. A tired growl puffs from his lips. Doubt this old wolf can bring anything new to the table that you haven't already thought of. For him, this was fact. Ever since he took her into his care, when she was a youngling, he taught her everything she needed to know when risking the odds. They were not favorable, to say the least. Within the fog of war, fear dominates the hearts and minds of everyone. A lord above all, on the battlefield, but to a Shurkaran, it's their greatest teacher in life. To brave through it and not be consumed by fear meant facing the obstacle before you and bracing for the unknown beyond them. Most would break under such pressure, but a Shurkaran is raised to accept it. Zutta knew Naja well enough to know that she does not frighten easily. She takes joy in making others fear her more, if anything. However, he couldn't help but smell the festering stench of doubt in her. Behind her stoic gaze lay a lifetime of turmoil. How she aimed to funnel it was all up to her. He knew this much. Hopefully our new bird friend will give us insight on the matter. Who knows? Naja hugs herself. Her black claws tangle themselves into the thick tanned fur. Do as you will for now. We'll head westward at dawn. Please do not keep up. Promise. It won't take too long. Try not to stay up all night, okay? Naja didn't respond. Zutta turns to head back to camp. He stops halfway and takes in the quiet scenery. After all of the events that took place, Naja's stance for tonight became clear to him. Maybe it wasn't wise to set up camp near a rock quarry.